For everybody that said that legalizing same-sex marriage would not change the Constitution and the institution of marriage in America, here comes the argument for polygamy. I don't want to say I told you so, but we'll talk about that next on Get Right with Lenny McAllister, starting right
now. Get Right with Lenny McAllister.
And here we go.
The way we help bring back America and we build the bridges and bring people together is by making sure we hold everybody accountable in a 360 fashion.
So let me close with this. Yes, there is a change that we can believe in, but it will never come from a politician or a government program.
We cannot find physical sanity here in the land of Lincoln, from Carbondale to Elgin, that we can collectively continue to tolerate the insanity found on the streets of South Chicago and these neighborhoods of the world.
We got to move away from the American Idol soundbite nature of politics and back to the American statesman of humble servant leadership that we used to see in politics.
It is time to roll out the era of the new, educated, engaged, and energized American citizen.
I go do the jail ministry. I speak to the kids in the streets. So I'm never going to lay down being conservative just as much as I'll never lay down being a proud African American.
I feel like a black republic. Money I got coming in. Can't turn my back on the hood. I got love for the
Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome back to another edition, a wonderful, wonderfully fun edition of Get Right with Lenny McAllister. You know what we do here. Very simple. Twitter, you want to contact me, you want to get in touch with me, you want to tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, you want to agree 100% or anything in between. Very simple. LENNYMCALLISTER on Twitter, on Facebook, you know the drill. tinyurl.com/LENNYPAGE. You can find me on the American Urban Radio Network, where we will be starting, I just got an official word that we will be starting POP, Political Opinions and Perspectives, starting January 2014. The video offering that will be coming out once a week on the American Urban Radio Network website, which is AURN.com. You'll be able to catch that there after the holidays as well. Also got official word that I will be one of the new panelists. We're doing a series here on WQED called 4802, which is already in effect, but they're going to be rotating in a new panel. They already have some established veterans, but they're going to bring in a younger generation, Generation X and the millennials, you know, because us rascally crazy kids have actually something to say, believe it or not. And I'm actually one of those rascally crazy kids that will be talking about that. So that starts in January 2014 as well. A lot of exciting things coming up after the holiday, so you'll have to continue to tune in to www.lennymcallister.com. You'll have to continue to go to that website. You'll have to continue to tune in to Get Right with Lenny McAllister, which is why I enjoy having you here on the weekdays so very much. So thank you very much once again. Now, with that said, I already started touching upon it, and I don't want you all to think that I'm a Bible thumper. I am a Christian. I believe in God. I believe in the redeeming quality of God. I believe that God works in our everyday lives. However, with that said, I am not a Bible thumper. I'm not somebody that thinks that you're going to go to hell just because you stepped on a crack and broke your mother's back, or you did something wrong one time and God doesn't have the ability to forgive you, or you're condemned, or anything else along those lines. I am also not one of those conservatives. I am a Christian conservative. I am a Republican. But I am not one of those Christian conservatives that believes that if you're homosexual, you're automatically going to hell. And just the same, I don't think that if you're involved in a homosexual relationship, or if you're even in a same-sex marriage, that you're automatically going to hell. I don't believe that. I do believe that marriage should be defined between one man and one woman at one time. I do believe that, and I've said that previously. That is from my cradle Catholic upbringing. That is from my Christian conservative political and socio-political base. That's just where I am. I try not to discriminate. I try to share my point of view, why I believe that way, and I move forward from there. With that said, though, and so I want to put that in that context, that I don't say these things out of hate, because I don't hate. It's what I believe we should be doing as a society. That's just kind of where I am with it. I'm not going any further than that. But I will say this, and I could, but I won't, because I want to get to what I said was going to happen in the courts when you start shifting the definition of marriage. One, I don't think it should be a federal constitution, but I do believe in the institution of marriage being one man, one woman at one time. And the argument I made years ago, and specifically over the last 18 months, whether it was on WVON, on CNN, on television shows, in print, etc., when I talked about same-sex marriage being redefined at the federal level, I said once you start changing the definition of marriage to include same-sex couples, the next step was going to be authorizing and legalizing polygamy at the state level, one by one by one by one, throughout the United States of America. And everybody told me, and you can say I was crazy, you can agree, disagree, you know where to find me on Twitter, know where to find me on Facebook. I said, as far back as 2010, in Illinois, when they were having this argument about civil unions, which has already gone from civil unions to same-sex marriage in the state of Illinois, I made this case then. I put it out there. I said, once you authorize same-sex marriages, the next argument is going to be, well, if they're consenting adults and they want to be in a homosexual relationship that is going to be constituted as a marriage, then what's the difference between 2 consenting adults and 3 consenting adults and 4 consenting adults and 10 consenting adults? And everybody sat there and told me that, no, Len, now see, this is why we don't listen to you Republicans. This is why you social conservatives, you Christian conservatives, when it comes to politics, you don't know what you're talking about, because you're taking just a level of fairness and you're stretching it way too far. You're exaggerating a situation. You are making a mockery out of people's civil rights, which again, I still tell you that the right to marriage is not found in the Constitution. It is not a constitutional amendment, regardless of what I was told previously on another show. It's not in the Constitution. Now, you can make the argument that there's a level of fairness that should be included, but it's not a constitutional amendment when it comes to marriage. Sorry. With that said, the argument was made repeatedly that if you allow same-sex marriage, if you change the definition of marriage from being one man and one woman at one time, and you allowed it to be same-sex, there's no legal way that you can then stop polygamy from coming into the mix in America. Now, you may say, again, that's a mockery, but here you do now have this case in Utah, where the judge is striking down key portions of the law banning polygamy in the state of Utah. Now, if you know anything about history, you'll understand that the whole way that Utah became a state was to outlaw polygamy. Go look at your history. Deseret was the name of the territory out west where the Mormons went. They wanted Deseret, which I believe was twice the size of Utah. They wanted Deseret to be a state within the United States of America, and they wanted it to be a Mormon-centric state. When the United States Congress said, okay, we'll let you come into the Union, the one key faction that they wanted to make sure was the case was that, aside from shrinking the state, was that polygamy would be outlawed. Now, one could make the argument, well, that's, discriminating against a religion. And there's an argument to be made about that. I mean, that's what makes this fuzzy. There's an argument to be made for that. But there's also an argument to say, listen, we have to have one universal definition of marriage that makes sense for the American society. Something that we don't have to legislate from on high, but we all kind of get it. We all kind of are working within the same rules. Which is why the argument for same-sex marriage being at the federal level or continuing to sweep across the states in changing the definition of marriage. Because it does change the definition of marriage one way or another. You can say 2 adults or 2 adults. Well, a man and a woman is not the same as 2 women or 2 men. The definition changed. Whether you want to condemn that new definition or not, and I'm not condemning that again. I'm not saying that they're going to hell. I'm not saying that we should thumb our nose at them. I'm not saying you should discriminate against them. I'm not saying that you should do some of the vile things that people do against homosexuals in the United States of America out of hatred and bigotry. I'm not saying that. What I am making the argument for, in essence, is that when you start changing the definition of marriage, a definition that's been in place in Western society for as long as we can remember, in much of the world, I won't say all of the world, much of the world, for as long as we can remember. If you are coming from a Judeo-Christian background, like the majority of Americans are, this is something that goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. Here's the thing. Once you start, and I know you can go Old Testament, I know you can start talking about people having 2 wives and 3 wives and concubines and everything else, but we're talking about Genesis. We're talking about the root, the beginning of the canonized Bible. We can go in that controversy as well, but not today. We'll do Bible study and Bible history another day. Just putting that out. I know, but another day. The whole argument I'm trying to make is this. Once you start changing the definition of marriage from one man, one woman at one time, and you start authorizing same-sex marriages, whether you agree or disagree on the merits of the legal argument, the civil rights argument, etc. And I've made the case that you got to make sure that they have the same protections, even if you don't label it marriage. If you're an American, you got to have certain civil rights. You have to have certain unions protected. So you can make that argument too. But once you start changing that definition and allowing that definition of that relationship to be the same as or called marriage, then you have to include polygamy into the mix. And I'm telling you that people are going to push this next. Will it hit the same level of controversy, of media attention, of financial backing, of lobbying that you see with same-sex marriage? I doubt that. I don't think that's going to be the case. But I do think you're going to start finding people be creative with polygamy and polygamists. And for example, I am remarried. I know this is a dangerous example, but I'm going to do it because if I'm going to make an example of somebody, I'll use myself. I am remarried. I have been remarried for over 10 years. That means in order to be remarried, I had to divorce somebody, because means you've done it again, which means you've done it previously. Only makes sense, right? A little English grammar lesson, but you didn't need that. But anywho, back to my story analogy. If I were a judge dealing with Lenny McAllister from the courtroom, I could conceivably make an argument that no, you may not divorce your ex-wife. You must stay with your ex-wife, and even if you find somebody else to share your life with that may actually be your soulmate, that you may actually get along with, that you may actually be productive with in a holistic sense, spiritually, emotionally, physically, economically, academically, you must still stay married to a person that is not good for you, and you may not be good for her. But because you've already joined yourselves in marriage, you may not break that bond of marriage. Instead, you may take on another wife. And by the way, she may take on another husband. So legally, you have ties to each other. But I want to keep the family together since you share children. So you can take on another spouse, and she can take on another spouse, and you will just be this big joint family, which in a creepy kind of way means that the new husband that my ex-wife may have is related to the new wife that I have. And that we're tied together. You think that's crazy, but I told you that once you started changing the definition of same-sex marriage and making same-sex marriage equal to traditional marriage, in every sense of the word, once you started doing that, the next logical argument was going to be polygamy. Now, people that want to marry a roller coaster or their dog, a dog can't give consent, a roller coaster can't give consent, but another person can. 3 other people can. 3 other people over the age of 18 can give consent, and now 4 of you are in a marriage. And if you could start changing I know you may think this is nuts. Agree, disagree, hit me up on Twitter. I know you may think this is nuts. But if you can change the definition of marriage and what's legal in the United States of America, what's legal in each of the 50 states in America, to go from one man, one woman at one time, to same-sex marriage, and now you start playing this game of polygamy. You start doing that. If you can change the definition of marriage, why can't you change the definition and the flexibility or restraints of divorce? Everything's on the table now. So the analogy that I brought up, which may sound far-fetched and nuts and cuckoo, because why would anybody want to force somebody to stay married to somebody, even if they're going to marry somebody else, or even if they're both going to marry somebody else? Which in my scenario, my ex-wife got remarried. I got remarried. We both had other children in these other marriages. But if I'm a judge, and I know that polygamy is now on the table in regards to this is not completely banned, this is something we need to revisit, why not sit there and make the argument that, well, instead of allowing you to get divorced in 90 days or 180 days or 365 days, because there are children involved, I'm going to force you to stay married for 5 years. I'm going to force you to stay married so that your children can have a home, quote unquote, home, even though it's not really a home, obviously, but they'll have a foundation where they can be raised with their mother and their father being married until they're 18 years old. In my case, my son, I believe, when I got divorced, was 2 years old. So that would be 16 years of being married to somebody that I've already ended the relationship with, and vice versa. She has found somebody to get married to. I have found somebody to get married to. Now you have 4 people that are connected through marriage, literally through marriage. And this is supposed to be healthy for the children. Now, yes, you could say, well, polygamy is consent. Well, we've already changed the definition of marriage, so why can't I change the definition of what polygamy can be too? This is why the argument for same-sex marriage was dangerous, because once you start opening Pandora's box, it's going to be wide open. There's no two ways about it. You know, I've heard arguments, people saying that all these cults that take on these child brides are now going to go to Utah in places that follow this pattern. I won't even go down that path. That's an argument that can be made by somebody else. I think that there's something that can be said about that the David Koreshes and the Warren Jeffs and the rest of those type of characters can start coming out of the woodwork and saying, I have someplace to go, someplace to belong to, and I am now legally protected at the highest level of the courts in that state, even as we wait to have it pushed to the Supreme Court. I don't see how you're going to be able to say that same-sex marriages are legal and then tell polygamists that it's not legal. And if you're not going to be able to do that, then I can see both the definition of marriage completely being changed, as well as the restraints, flexibilities, or restrictions within the process, because it's not an institution, even though it is in America, but the process of divorce, which goes back to why this is important in the first place, because it all jacks up the definition of family. Now, again, let's take it to the root. I'm not saying that homosexuals can't be good mothers and fathers. That's not the argument. That's not what I'm saying, because that's not true. Let me just say that. It's not true. Nor do I think that if you have a homosexual mother or father that they're going to automatically mess up your mind and you're going to have this deviant lifestyle and blah, 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 blah. I'm not saying that either, because that's not true either. It's just simply not true. And you're not all going to be on the roller coaster to hell, one-way express, because God don't like ugly. Again, you go study your Bible. It says there's one sin that's unforgivable, that's blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. I don't think that homosexuality is blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. That's just me. Therefore, even if it is a sin, and if you watch Scandal, you know that Sally Langston thinks it's a sin. A little bit of humor there. And it is humor. My point is, I'm not saying that. I don't believe that. I have my opinions on traditional marriage and what that institution should look like. Once you start changing that, once you start adjusting that, as we have with same-sex marriage, the door is now open to do this for polygamy. And I knew this was coming. I had told people this publicly and privately for over 2 years now. It's just common sense. And here it sits. And to me, Not that I'm afraid that some judge is going to make me get remarried to my ex-wife to keep my family. I'm not saying that. That was just an analogy I brought up. But if I can change the definition of marriage, I can change what divorce looks like in America. I can, again, if you're an activist court, you can conceivably bring down the divorce rate in America by forcing people to stay together for the sake of their children, even if they get remarried, and then tell them, well, you're still a married unit. And if you can do that, then as a married unit, you can very easily say that there are certain inalienable rights that you both have to visit the kids, to live with the kids. You can do all kind of things with this because now you have redefined both marriage and the divorce process. And once you've defined the divorce process and this type of muckety-muck, you can put restrictions on it. And do not tell me that the courts would never do this. If you've ever been to a family court, you see that the courts try to do all kinds of things. We have activist judges that do all kinds of things. Social engineering. When it comes to families, when it comes to jobs, when it comes to corporations. That do these things in very, very bad ways. We're not talking about discrimination. We're not talking about giving people an opportunity to be equal in society. We're talking about things that try to act like God in America, which is wrong. And once you start changing one traditional construct, you open the door for these types of things. And you can't tell me you've ever seen an American court system that has had self-restraint all the way through. We have seen it define people as property. We have seen it literally give rights to corporations as if they're people. We've seen all kinds of things on the conservative and liberal sides of the aisle when it comes to judicial works, and in some cases, activism. If you're surprised about what's going on in Utah, if it doesn't stop now, don't be surprised. Don't be surprised as to what it does in a courtroom near you coming soon. You may think I'm nuts. I want your take. You may think I'm right. I want your take. You know where to find me on Twitter, LennyMcAllister. On Facebook, Lenny McAllister. It's tinyurl.com/Lenny page. Hit me up. I will find you tomorrow. You will find me tomorrow. We will talk more, maybe not about this, but other wonderful things touching our society, our politics, and our lives in the process, hopefully, to make them better. You know I love you. I will catch up to you on Tuesday. Have a great Monday. TCNGB. Take care and God bless.